So Mercedes just released their statement with a couple of quotes, one from Lewis Hamilton, one from Toto Wolff, of course, but basically comes down to Lewis has activated a release option in the contract announced last August, which I find interesting because we didn't know the whole details of that said contract, but now we know that he had a release option and he's going to take it, which leads me to assume, and that's a dangerous game, so I'm curious your thoughts. If he wants out of Mercedes and obviously wants to drive for Ferrari, does that lend itself to lack of confidence in the W15 or the progress Mercedes is making or not in this case?
I think it's understandable to come to that conclusion. The quote we have from Lewis is a pretty stock press release quote where understandably it's come from Mercedes. He's thanking Mercedes for his time there and he wants to go out on a high. You know, that's kind of what we'd expect. He also said it was one of the most difficult decisions he's ever had to make,
sure.
which I do not doubt whatsoever. I imagine that is absolutely how he feels about this. But yeah, that decision, you know, what made it? What was it that ticked over and made him change his mind? We know that he hasn't won a race for 2 years with Mercedes under these regulations, but we also know that Mercedes were addressing that. They were making changes. They've been pursuing new development avenues all through last year, taking that into the winter. There was, you know, that all teams at this stage are cautious about making any big statements. But for Lewis to make this decision before his car has even been bolted together, you know, it's not finished yet. It exists in the virtual world. He would have driven it in the simulator and had an understanding. He would have seen the development path the team has taken, and maybe that's what's put him off. But I do wonder why he had to make this decision before the start of the season. We wonder whether there's pressure, you know, from Ferrari to make sure that the deal was done. I understand everyone wanting to get it done, but if I was in Lewis's position, I would have at least been tempted to start the year, see where the cars stack up, see what kind of job, you know, Mercedes have really done before committing to it. So these are all questions I unfortunately do not have an answer for because we haven't had a chance to speak to Lewis and ask him about it. And the details of exactly his thinking process are still relatively hidden. I haven't seen a huge amount of reporting anywhere that can really dive into what Lewis was thinking about this one.
But that's what also makes this sport so compelling and so unique, because you're going to have a driver in a seat driving for a team this season, Mercedes, who's been very good to him. They've had a great partnership. Obviously, they've won many, many times together. And yet, you know, his future is not with that team anymore. And then he's jumping ship to like that dynamic is so awkward, and no other sport gives it to you like that. So I find it so unbelievably fascinating. It's going to be a storyline throughout the entirety of the season, which is media members we of course appreciate. Toto Wolff said, you know, Lewis will always be an important part of Mercedes motorsport history. We know that. However, we knew our partnership would come to a natural end at some point, and that day has now come. You knew that the partnership would end, certainly. I just thought it would be Lewis riding off into the sunset, retiring from the sport, not necessarily finishing his career in a different car. I'll ask you the same. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's exactly what everyone was thinking. I think that's what Mercedes were thinking. You know, when that, just to be clear, when this contract that he's currently in with Mercedes was announced, I mean, it hasn't actually started yet because he hasn't gone out for the first test of this new contract, which we already know is going to end in a year. When that was announced, it was announced as a 2-year contract. And, you know, sometimes teams might disguise what they've done by saying a multi-year contract. Incidentally, that's what Ferrari have said. It's a multi-year contract. Now, that could mean anything from 2 to, you know, 7. Well, not very often, but certainly 5-6 years potentially. You know, but to do a 2-year contract, say it's a 2-year contract, but have this, you know, this release kind of clause in there that Hamilton has activated. Now, that's not that unusual. We know that these release clauses do exist in a lot of contracts. Often they're related to performance, so the team has to underperform before the driver can activate it. But obviously with Lewis, you know, he's a slightly different level of driver, and so if he wanted to make sure there was this clause in there, then perhaps he was insistent on that. And that may have been why it took such a long time for the contract to be confirmed, because even that one took a long time for it to come out. You know, this is relatively quick in Lewis Hamilton terms. Usually we're waiting a whole year of racing to understand where he's going to move next. So yeah, look, you are not alone in thinking that Lewis Hamilton would end his career at Mercedes. If you had asked me, yesterday, will Lewis Hamilton end his career at Mercedes on a podcast, I'd be like, that's a pretty boring question, because I think we all know the answer is yes. Obviously, I was wrong.
And I'm kind of glad you're wrong. And I was wrong. And everybody else, because I think this is going to be so fascinating to watch unfold.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.